This story took place when I was 17 years old and home alone when my parents took a trip out of the US. We lived there for 3 years for my father's job when I was a child, so they were visiting old friends they had made when we lived there. My older brother was out of state in college at the time, so I was alone for the week. It was a Friday night, and one of my good friends was supposed to spend the night with me so that I wasn't alone for the weekend. Something came up, and he had to leave, leaving me home alone. I wasn't worried or nervous at all because I had been staying home alone since I was 12 years old, and as I got older, I had spent several nights alone. My friend ended up leaving at around 10 o'clock that night. I texted my mom, letting her know that he had to leave, and that I would be alone for the rest of the night. She told me that was fine, but to just be careful and make sure the alarm was set. So I got ready for bed and decided to sleep in my parents' bedroom because they had a huge TV in their room with cable, which I didn't have in my room. I set the house alarm, got in bed, and started looking for a movie on cable to watch. My dog was lying on the bed with me, so I knew she couldn't have done anything to cause what happened next. About an hour had passed, and I was flipping through the channels when my house alarm suddenly went off. I immediately looked up at the alarm unit by the bedroom door and saw the red light was flashing on and off. I froze. It was a very loud and repetitive beeping sound. I think it took me about 15 seconds to process what was happening. Did the alarm just go off by itself? I thought. There's no way a door opened. Immediately, I started thinking of anyone and everyone I knew that could have possibly opened one of the doors to my house with a key, since all the doors were locked. I knew my brother was not coming home for the weekend. I knew it was not my friend who had recently left, because I had just received a text saying that he just got home. I went through all of my friends that I could think of, and every single one of them was either out of town or busy that night. I knew none of my neighbors would have opened any of the doors either. I went through all of this in my head in that 15 seconds that I was frozen on the bed. Finally, I snapped out of it and ran to my parents' bedroom door, closed it, and locked it. I refrained from turning the alarm off because I knew that it automatically calls the police once it hits 1 minute of going off, and I was also thinking the loud alarm would probably scare away whoever just broke in. After I locked the door, I went to my mom's night table and took out her revolver that she kept in there, in case of emergencies like this one. I am only about 5'4", and I knew that if anyone who came through that door had the intention of hurting me, they would probably succeed. I wasn't taking chances. I took out the gun, made sure it was loaded, and took the safety off. I held the gun up and pointed it at the door, but kept my finger off the trigger, as you're supposed to do, until you know for a fact you're going to shoot. I couldn't believe that I was holding a gun and pointing it at something, and possibly someone, with the intention to shoot if they proved to be dangerous. I sat there mentally preparing myself to shoot whoever managed to get through the door. This is something I never thought I would have to do. I remained calm and didn't let my emotions or fear get the better of me. I knew I needed to stay quiet and keep my head clear in case something actually happened. I was kneeling on the floor in this position for what felt like forever, but I'm sure it was only a couple minutes. The alarm was still going off, and I decided that I would call 911 just in case the alarm system malfunctioned and did not call the police. I dialed 911, explained to them everything that was going on, and they sent 2 police officers my way. The dispatcher stayed on the phone with me until the cops got there. They checked the exterior perimeter of my house before knocking on the front door. I turned the alarm off and put the gun away. I opened the front door and talked to the officers. They told me they found no sign of a break-in on the outside of the house. They asked me a few questions about what had happened, and I explained everything to them. They then asked me if I wanted them to do a sweep of the interior of the house to see if anyone had broken in and possibly hid somewhere. Looking back, I cannot believe how stupid my answer was. No, I think it's okay. The cops assured me they would remain in the area and told me not to hesitate to call if anything else happened. I walked them out, locked the front door behind them, and went back into my parents' bedroom. I made sure my dog wasn't spooked at anything that happened, being that she's a 20-pound Cocker Spaniel and not exactly the guard dog type. I then proceeded to finally call my parents and tell them what happened. My mom has always been an extremely calm person, so she didn't panic, and I guess I have her to thank for my calm attitude during all of this, because I'm a lot like her in that sense. My dad, however, was clearly very worried about me. They asked me if I was okay and if I wanted them to come home early. I told them that that wasn't necessary and that I'm sure nothing like that would happen again, since the alarm probably scared them off. I hung up the phone with my parents and realized I hadn't turned the alarm back on. So I went to the alarm system, entered the code, and pushed set. Nothing happened. It wasn't turning back on. I was confused at first, but then I realized the alarm doesn't turn on unless every door in the house is completely shut. My heart dropped. I had the realization that I had to now go around the house and look for whatever door had been opened and set the alarm off in the first place. This is when I realized how stupid I was to tell the officers no when they asked if I wanted them to search the interior of the house. I went back to my mom's night table and picked up the gun again, mentally preparing for the worst. I then went to every door on the ground level of my house holding the gun in both my hands. I finally made it to the hallway where the door entering our garage was, and it was there that I saw the door to the garage had been left wide open. Chills went through my body at the thought that someone actually tried to break in, and they succeeded. We had 2 ground-level windows in our garage, so someone coming through there to get into the house was not far-fetched. I turned the light on in the garage and held the gun in front of me. I looked at the 2 windows in the garage, and there didn't seem to be any sign that they were opened. I immediately shut the door to the garage, locked it, and tried turning the alarm on again. It worked this time. After this, I went through the entirety of the house with the gun in hand to check if anyone had hidden anywhere. I prayed the entire time that I wouldn't find anyone and wouldn't have to use the gun. To my relief, I found nothing and no one. I slept with my parents' bedroom door locked that night, and with the revolver under my pillow for the rest of the week. When my parents finally returned home from the trip, my father inspected the windows in the garage to see if they had been forced open or anything like that. As I figured, there was no evidence of a forced entry. My parents concluded that the door to the garage must not have been shut all the way, and a gust of wind came from outside through the garage and then swung the door to the house open, causing the alarm to go off. We never figured out what actually happened. I am now 23 years old. 6 years have passed since that night, and whatever it was, whatever truly happened, it continues to be the scariest night of my life. I can't even bring myself to imagine what would have happened if we didn't have an alarm system, and if I didn't have my mom's gun. Although nothing bad actually ended up happening, I advise everyone listening to this story to always make sure your home has an alarm, and to always keep the doors locked. Beaches often come to mind when you think about spring break. That's probably because most people need a break from their stressful job or schoolwork and want to get away. And what better place to unwind than on the beach, with warm sand, cool breezes, and refreshing water. The scenario in my story was unfortunately not the relaxing getaway that I had hoped for. A couple years ago, my friend and I took a trip down south to enjoy some much-needed relaxation. We both were extremely stressed with work and really needed a mental break from everything at the office. To be fair, most of the trip was pretty relaxing until a night where my friend and I were laying on the beach, which was weird for us. We never really went to the beach at night, as we both preferred the warm sunlight during the day. We were watching the moon reflect off the water when we saw two people walk up to us seemingly out of nowhere. I noticed that one of them was a girl, quite pretty actually. She had wild curly hair, and from what I could see of her eyes, they looked very dark. She was wearing a beach cover-up over her bathing suit, and she was with a guy, I assume her significant other, because she was holding his hand. He had a long beard with long brown hair that was up in a bun. He was wearing a red flannel that was unbuttoned, with no shirt underneath, and just plain bathing suit shorts. They just stood there standing over us, way too close, making us feel uncomfortable. Both of them just staring and smiling at us, smiling for no reason. Finally, my friend, a little annoyed, said, "Excuse me, can we help you with something?" The woman, still smiling, said in a slow, soft voice, "You two are quite beautiful, you know." I was at a loss for words and just looked over to my friend, and he just said, "Thanks. You can leave us alone now." Clearly his annoyance was turning into anger. The woman looked at him and said in a chipper, creepy voice, "No, thank you," while she still continued to smile. Her boyfriend still continued to just stand there, stiff, not moving. After a moment, another couple came over. Again, both were smiling. She also had a cover-up on, but was sporting some pigtails that were not even close to symmetrical, and her boyfriend had really curly, shaggy-looking hair. The woman standing basically on top of us averted her attention to them and said, "Look, a new couple." I was pretty unsettled, and these four people just kept inching closer and closer to me and my friend. My friend finally stood up and stepped to one of the guys and said, "Take one more step, man." All four of the smiling weirdos began laughing, and before I could even react, one of the guys lunged at my friend. It was the scariest thing I have ever seen. Both men started to beat up my friend while both girls just sat there and laughed. I tried to intervene, but one of the girls grabbed me and tossed me to the ground. The two guys then threw my friend down in the sand next to me, and with a blink of an eye, their permanent smiles turned into faces of anger and malice. Somehow, my friend had the mindset to do something to help us get out of there. He kicked the ankle of one of the girls so she stumbled. This brought the attention of the others to her stumbling backwards in the sand. In this split second, my friend grabbed my hand, and we ran as fast as we could towards our resort. Looking in the distance, we could see the two couples standing there, but they were not chasing us. We got back to our room and locked the doors, and turned off the lights. All night long in the hallway, we could hear giggling and shushing. I don't know if we were just being paranoid, but we were definitely fearful that it was the freak shows from the beach. The next day we checked out early from the hotel and left for home. We didn't want to risk running into these dangerous strangers again. We also didn't want to call the cops and file a report and all of that, though. As we were leaving the hotel, we saw the two girls on the corner of the street waving and smiling at a car that wasn't ours. We couldn't believe it. We just peeled out and left for home, putting this experience behind us. When we got home, we decided to inform the resort of our incident. They apologized and said they would look into the matter, but stated since no report was filed at the time of the incident, there was probably not much they could do. I know some of you may not find this story particularly scary in the traditional sense, but encountering such psychotic people who would harm strangers without a second thought is by far the most traumatic experience of my life. Yeah, happy vacation. So this story happened to me and my friend. We'll call her Anna, about 7 months ago. In the town we live in, there's a popular bridge with train tracks underneath it, where a lot of us will go smoke, drink, or just hang out. It was the summer going into my senior year, and Anna and I were bored one Saturday night, as there isn't much to do around where I live. So we decided to just go hang out at the bridge. Now, the way the bridge is set up, there are 2 ways to get in. The first way is you have to turn down a side street and park off to the side of the road on this small strip of gravel. Then you walk down the street a little way, and then go behind the guardrails and down a steep slope of dirt and rocks to get to the tracks. You have to cross the train tracks and then go to the side of where the bridge is to climb up the rocks. The second way to get in is through the other side. You just hop down off the street into a short trail that leads you down there. You don't have to cross the tracks or anything to get there. Anna and I get to the bridge, and by now it's about 10:30 or 11 o'clock p.m., so it's extremely dark outside. We didn't really think about it, as we lived in a nice town, and nothing bad really ever happened where we lived. So we hopped out of the car, turned on our flashlights from our phones, and started to make our way down the slope, trying not to fall as we laughed and shouted a bit. We finally get down and climb up the rocks to get up to where the couches and the small fire pit were. I sat down against one of the pillars on one of the folding chairs while Anna sat on the couch. We were just talking, hitting our vape pens, and nothing was out of place. After about 20 minutes or so, I started to hear small noises, like something or someone was moving around in the woods behind, or more like next to the tracks. I then had the strongest feeling that we were being watched. I kept looking behind me to try to see if I could see anyone, but it was no use. It was so dark that I couldn't see my own hand in front of me. I think Anna started to get the same feeling I had, as we both just made eye contact and gave each other a "I feel it too" kind of look. Anna then asked me, "What are you doing?" and tried to put my arm down. I told her to be quiet as I shined my flashlight in the direction I thought we were being watched from. She started to quietly panic, and I told her to calm down. We tried to just tell ourselves that we were just being paranoid. The flashlight didn't shine that far, and we couldn't see anyone in the area that the light did cover. The noises started happening more frequently, which made us panic even more. We started to discuss the situation. If there was someone there, where would they be hiding? How long had they been there? Were there more than one of them? Anna then got the stupid idea to shout, "Hello, is someone there? We're chill, you don't have to hide." We sat in silence for 5 minutes as nothing happened, and the noises stopped. It was dead silent. Then, all of a sudden, an empty plastic water bottle was thrown in our direction. We could see where it had landed only a few feet away from us. We were scared absolutely shitless. Now we knew that someone had been there watching us. Anna said we needed to get out of there, but we were both too scared to move. Afraid that if we did, whoever was out there would come out and attack us as we tried to climb down the rocks. We heard a twig snap and I nearly screamed. Anna decided that she was going to jump off the edge of the ledge we were sitting on. I grabbed her arm and said that it's too high to jump off. You can't even see all the way down to where the tracks are, and made her stay with me. By now, we had been there for at least 45 minutes to an hour. The person hiding was just sitting there in the dark, watching us. We calmed down and decided that when we counted 3, we were going to run across the rocks and book it across the tracks and back up the slope to the car. I counted. 1, 2, 3. When I said it, We ran as fast as we could, not looking back to see who was there. We made it back up the hill completely out of breath. We decided to walk over to the bridge and see if we could hear anything. We stood on the bridge above the opposite side of where we had been sitting before. We called down, shouting, "Who's there? You better leave now," and a bunch of other things and a few obscenities that I will not repeat. We heard a shuffling and rocks moving directly under us. When we were running across earlier, they must have tried to chase us, and when we made it to the top, they just went to the other side of the tracks and climbed up those rocks. There was no way he had been there the whole time, as he had thrown a water bottle at us earlier, and it would have been too far to throw from the other side, and it came from a completely different direction. We got really freaked out and started to leave, and then heard a train coming. I grabbed my friend's arm and said, "Wait, if we wait for the train, maybe we can see who is watching us." She agreed, and we slowly and cautiously walked back down the slope as the train began to approach. The train lights were so bright, and at first, we couldn't see anyone. Then I look over to the pillars, and to my absolute horror, I see someone standing there with the blankest eyes I have ever seen, and they're peeking around one of the pillars. The person looked strung out, like they were on something. They saw me immediately and ducked back behind the pillar. I screamed as me and my friend turned to sprint back up to her car before the train passed so he couldn't follow us. We booked it out of there and haven't been back at night since. I still get freaked out that that person had been watching us the whole time we were down there. And if they did manage to get us while we were running, what would they have done? I don't know. And I'm not sure that I want to. I live in a boring little town in Florida. It's an uneventful place, so for fun, or maybe just out of pure boredom, my friend and I would meet up and take late-night walks around our town. We usually met up across the street from these woods right next to a small abandoned fire station, down the road from a gas station. On this particular night, my friend wanted to go explore this little path that cuts directly through the woods. It was about 1 a.m., and I thought it might make for a cool adventure, so I obliged. We cross the street and make it to the mouth of the trail. I should mention that there was construction going on at the left-hand side of the woods, so it was fenced off, but the lights from the site slightly illuminated the trail, so we really didn't need flashlights. I had this uneasy feeling right off the bat, like we were being watched, but I chalked it up to nerves and an overactive imagination. We continue down the trail, and I start to notice weird stuff like branches breaking and leaves crunching just out of our view. I tell my friend that maybe we should leave, and not 10 seconds later, the lights at the construction site shut off. Oh, great. The moon was probably full, so I wasn't too worried. We didn't walk too terribly far, and I could still make out the mouth of the trail. We decided to walk back, and I felt relieved. And that's when I noticed it. Crouched down in a bush not 10 feet away, I could see someone's eyes as they watched us. I whispered to my friend that we needed to run, and we did, and I could hear the person running after us close behind. We kept running, and eventually made it out of the woods and crossed the street. I turned to look back, and I saw a man in the mouth of the trail. This man was completely naked and looked absolutely insane. He had a glass bottle in his hand, and he threw it in our direction. He then knelt down and started picking up rocks to throw at us. That's when we left. We didn't stop until we made it to the gas station. I noticed that my friend is bleeding pretty bad from his arm, and he tells me that right after I grabbed him to run, something hit him. Upon further inspection, I saw that my friend had a large piece of glass sticking out of his arm. He needed 15 stitches. We called the cops and explained what happened, partly because we didn't want anyone else to get hurt, and partly because I didn't feel safe with that guy running around. When the cops searched the woods that morning, they found signs of someone living in there, and much more disturbingly, bloody clothes that looked like they belonged to a little girl. I never heard anything about it since. The story I'm about to share with you happened almost 10 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old, and like most teenagers my age, I was content to lock myself away in my room with my laptop and headphones. In the fall of that year, my parents went up north for the weekend. We live in Michigan, and the Upper Peninsula is famous for its scenery that time of year. I was left with the house to myself for the entirety of the weekend, and thought nothing of it. I enjoyed my privacy, and didn't mind being alone. Let me tell you about my house and where we lived. Our house is very old, and a modest dwelling. 2 floors and a basement. All the bedrooms are on the first floor, since the second floor is an unfinished attic. The house itself is about 8 miles from the nearest town. The backyard is pretty large, with an even larger cornfield, stretching out for acres and acres, separating the property from the lake on the other side of the trees. The cornfield stretches partially around the house, creating a wall between our house and our neighbors to the east. It wasn't isolated by any means. There are 5 houses very near, 1 on each side and 3 across the street. A local hunter, a farmer, a retired couple, a construction worker, and the local preacher were the people I called neighbors. It's a quiet road, little traffic, and only the occasional coyote howl to disrupt the night. A nice, calm place to live. It was day 2 of my weekend alone. It was a chilly evening, so I shut my window and locked it before I huddled up on my bed with my laptop. I've always been a big fan of urban legends, especially legends that have some truth woven into the tale. Truth always makes a good story better, and makes a scary story all the more frightening. That night I had no idea that I was about to take part in my own scary tale. While zoning out on my laptop, watching horror videos and reading stories online, I heard an odd noise over my headphones. I pulled one speaker away from my ear and focused on the sound. The sound was coming from my window. My bedroom is a corner bedroom, and as a result, I have 2 windows. One window facing my neighbor to the west, and the second window faced the backyard. It was the second window that had the strange noise. At first, I thought leaves and loose branches were getting blown against the screen, since it was fall, and the weather in Michigan can get pretty harsh and unpredictable. But my reasoning didn't quite fit with the sound. It wasn't a banging or rattling. It was like metal wires snapping. I removed my headphones and used my laptop screen as a light to see where I was walking without putting a glare on the window's glass. The curtains and blinds beneath were drawn, preventing anything outside from being able to see inside. I was nervous about looking outside. I was alone, and I had no idea what was going on. I hugged my wall as I slipped my fingers under the curtains and slowly, carefully, pulled down one of the blinds so I could look outside. There, standing in the darkness right outside my window, was a person holding a knife. My heart skipped a beat as my blood ran cold. My instincts told me not to make a sound and to stay out of sight. I slid down my wall and crawled on my hands and knees to my cell phone sitting on the small table next to my bed. I called 911 and whispered everything to the person on the other line. I told them someone was outside my window and that they had a knife, and that I was alone. The operator stayed on the line with me and kept reassuring me that the police were on their way, and that's when I heard my screen start to be sliced. I kept telling her I wanted to run, but she insisted that I stayed put and didn't make a sound. Suddenly, the snapping sound of the screen wires stopped. I listened in fear when I heard a new sound. The knife was now digging at the wooden frame of the window, and the man was desperately trying to pry it open from the outside. The motion light in the backyard suddenly flashed on just seconds before the red and blue lights of the arriving police car shone through my other window. I listened carefully and heard someone running from the car to the backyard. I could also hear their radio clicking on and off as they checked the area. A loud knock on the front door made me jump. I heard a man call out for me, identifying himself as a cop. Still scared, I opened my bedroom door and crept down the hall. I peeked into the living room and didn't see anything. The knocking persisted, and again, the cop identified himself. I peeked through the window and saw him standing there, his eyes still checking the yard. I flung open the door and almost pulled the cop inside, just so happy to see someone else. He asked if I was okay and if I could give a description of the man I saw. I couldn't. He was wearing all black and had a hood pulled up which shrouded his face. All I could do was describe the large hunting knife that he used to slice my screen. His partner joined him on the front porch and told us that he didn't see anyone in the area. I kept insisting on what I saw, and they of course believed me, since the patrolling cop saw the damage to my screen. The cops did a second sweep of the property and made sure every single window was secured and that the doors were locked and the garage was secure. Before leaving, the cops told me they'd keep a patrol car in the area, but they were confident that whoever I saw wouldn't be back. They just figured that it was some teenager who was trying to break in through my window and got scared when he saw the police car arrive. I thanked them and proceeded to double-check the locks for myself. I wanted to call my mom, but I knew my parents were already on their way home and would be back in the morning. Unable to go back into my room, I chose to sleep on the couch in the living room and tell my parents as soon as they walked in the front door. About an hour later, after I was finally able to relax and started to drift off to sleep on the couch, I heard a loud bang against my back door. I sat straight up and looked through the kitchen and the back mudroom that leads to the back door. Bang! This time I knew I was in danger. I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911 again. This time, I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife from the butcher's block and huddled on the floor against the counter and the cabinets. I pressed the phone to my ear as the operator, a man this time, continued to talk to me so I didn't feel alone. Bang! I gripped the knife tighter and began mentally trying to psych myself up. If this man managed to get inside, would I be able to defend myself? He had a knife. Maybe that's why I grabbed one too. But I didn't know anything about him. How tall was he? How strong was he? Did I even stand a chance? Bang! I heard the wood on the doorframe crack. The old door was locked on by a chain. One more hard kick could surely break the door down, and then I didn't want to think about it. I prepared for the final bang, for the door to give in, and for that man to attack me, when I heard a voice yelling over the banging noise. "Get on the ground! Drop the knife!" "Oh, thank God," I said out loud. "The cops are still here." The operator on the line, who had been speaking to me throughout this entire ordeal, continued to try and keep me calm. I listened to the cop order the man to drop the knife over and over again, but I just knew that the crazy bastard wasn't listening. Then, another bang, but it wasn't from someone kicking the back door. It was from someone firing a gun. It was silent, and time seemed to stand still. A gentle knock at the front door drew my attention. The same cop as before was once again identifying himself. I told the operator a cop was at the door and hung up the phone. I opened the front door, the knife still in my hand. The cop saw it and very calmly suggested that I put it down. My hand was gripping the knife so tightly that my knuckles were white and my fingers were cramped. When I dropped the knife, the cop escorted me from the front door to his car, which was parked in the side yard. Under the motion lights of the backyard, I could see his partner standing over the body of the man in black. I could see his knife lying on the ground, just inches from his hand, and even from a distance, I could see there was blood on the blade. The man himself looked like he had been dead for weeks. His hood had fallen from his face, revealing it to the night. He was impossibly pale white. His skin was unnaturally aged, with heavy wrinkles and lots of discoloration. His hair was long, stringy, and blonde. His eyes, still open, were sunken into his skull. I was taken to the police station to deliver a statement and to ensure there was no other attackers on my property. When I told everything I knew to the interviewing cop, another cop walked into the room with a file in his hands. He whispered something to the first cop and handed him the file. I asked the cop if they knew who the man was, and he nodded. I asked to know who he was and what he wanted. At first, the cop didn't want to tell me, but I insisted. I managed to coax the cop into telling me, and a part of me wishes I hadn't. The man was a chronic junkie who abused any and all drugs he could get his hands on. He was also a violent schizophrenic with bipolar disorder. He used to live in the area until he was finally locked up in a mental hospital about 20 years prior. The act that got him locked away all those years ago was a result of his attempt to burn down a church, declaring that he was the true Son of God and that all religious figures were false prophets and tools of Satan. The cops figured that he was trying to break into my house because he thought it was where the preacher lived. He had the wrong house and probably would have killed me anyway if he had gotten inside. After a moment of letting this sink in, I asked why the cops didn't see him the first time I called. His answer sent shivers up my spine. And now, I never look at my backyard the same. He told me that the man had hidden in the cornfield the first time and was watching the house from between the rows. He had never left. He was there, watching the house and waiting for the police to leave. After looking at his picture, I could tell that he was absolutely crazy, and I'm very glad that he won't be around anymore.
One day when I was 13 or 14, I met up with an old friend. His name was Ethan. When we met up, we decided to go to a large park that was located between our houses. We walked, went on the swings for a while, but left after a girl started shouting after us. We walked to the basketball court close to the exit as we made our way towards Ethan's house. This area was surrounded by thick bushes and trees that are easy to hide in, so we had no idea what was about to happen. We weren't paying much attention to our surroundings, as we had a lot to catch up on, and we didn't notice a group of masked people dressed completely in black approaching us, until it was too late. We were surrounded, and we saw that they were armed with kitchen knives. There were 6 or 7 of them surrounding us when one of them spoke. He demanded all of our money and our phones. He said they would kill us if we refused or tried anything. His voice sounded familiar. When I got a better look at him, I realized it was my old best friend Jake. I didn't think he recognized me because he pointed his knife right at me and demanded our stuff again. At this point, Ethan had also realized who it was. Simultaneously, we both told him who we were. He looked at us for a second, and then pulled his mask off and greeted us. He told me that I hadn't changed much, before telling us that we were lucky and to get out of there. We started to walk away. As we reached the exit, we turned and saw them running into the bushes. Freaked out, we ran into Ethan's house and didn't leave for a few hours. When it came time for me to leave, I ran straight home, avoiding the park. I saw Jake again after this, but I always avoided him. I almost never went out on my own again, for the next few years, that is. So my childhood best friend, who was like a brother to me, almost mugged me. If he hadn't realized who I was, things could have been very different. The people with him seemed pretty ready to stab us even if we did what they wanted. He had screwed me over and dragged me into bad things before this, but I can't forgive him even though he let us go. He wasn't exactly a good person to begin with, but this was way too far. I did recently hear that he has turned his life around, but I'm done with him, and I hope to never see him again. So this happened to me when I was roughly 4 years old. Not super creepy, but it certainly contributed to my poor mother's fear of men, and consequently, the one she's instilled in me. Much more creepy incidents that occurred later on in my childhood only cemented this fact. When I was a kid, there was a company in my neighborhood that would drive around door to door and sell frozen meals and meat for relatively inexpensive prices. Given the fact that my neighborhood was preoccupied by parents with young children and the elderly, this service was quite popular, and my busy mom was just as much of a fan as the rest of the cul-de-sac. A few alternating people generally circled around weekly, and I remember them decently well, since my twin sister and I were very friendly and rushed to the door anytime there was a visitor. There was a very straightforward but kind woman who just wanted to get her job done, a sweet young man who adored our terrier, and a man roughly in his 40s who was generally very outgoing and talkative. Perhaps stereotypically so, based on his demographic, this story is centered on the last person. I don't recall the guy's name, nor does it matter for the sake of the story, so I'll just call him CDG, or Creepy Delivery Guy. Like I previously stated, CDG was a friendly guy, and outwardly quite normal. He was a clean-shaven, articulate guy who loved to talk about his daughter for minutes on end, who was about my age. He talked to my sister and I plenty while at the door, all about her. Even so, my mom still got a weird feeling from him, but dismissed them solely as he hadn't done anything to warrant concern. After a few rounds in our neighborhood, he asked my mother if he could use the restroom in a polite manner because his shift had been quite long. She hesitantly agreed and he thanked her, then returned after an abnormally long time and gave us our order. After this, the shifts no longer alternated and it was just CDG who delivered in our neighborhood. He requested they use the restroom every single time he delivered, and eventually didn't even bother explaining. Allow me to restate that he took an unusual long time every time. For my mom, the feelings of discomfort were intensifying, but she was very much too polite. The turning point, however, was when in our kitchen, CDG described to our mother how his daughter had gotten an infection in her vagina because she hadn't wiped properly after pooping and he had wiped back to front. He turned towards us, smiled wide, though still talking to my mom, and requested that he could show my sister and I how to wipe properly so that didn't happen to us. My mom of course said no. What a shock. After that, she didn't answer the door when he came around, and whenever we saw him driving the truck in the neighborhood, CDG would glare at us. We later discovered through word of mouth that he was unmarried and didn't have any children. Around first grade, I became friends with this kid named Stan. He was a couple of years older than I was, but he had a sister that was my age who I was also friends with. I also had a crush on their oldest brother, James. I was that girl who chased the poor, uninterested boys all around the playground. I lost contact with all three kids around middle school. Of course, when Facebook happened, I began getting in touch with people I'd gone to school with. It was a moderately sized K through 8th grade school, so you were basically with the same exact group of kids for each grade. This makes some pretty strong bonds, because there's a lot of us who kept in contact after moving on to high school for a little while before drifting apart. Because of this, I was always really excited when I got back in touch with those people. However, not all of these connections have been positive. I got a friend request from Stan one day, under a different name. The messages were the typical, "How's it going? What have you been up to?" etc. Then he started sending messages that were about my looks. They weren't obscene, but they did make me a bit uncomfortable. He started pushing to meet up. I can't explain it, but I just had a really off feeling about him, so I could kind of avoid making any kind of plans. He continued to be pushy about things, and finally I just stopped responding to his messages. I should also message... He started pushing to meet up. I can't explain it, but I just had this really off feeling about him, so I would kind of avoid making any kind of plans with him. He continued to be pushy about things, and I finally just stopped responding to his messages. I should also message that when I first accepted Stan's friend request, he literally went through every single one of my pictures and liked them. That should have been my first clue, but I just let it go. Then I started getting messages from my friends and even some family members asking me about him. Stan was basically going through and sending everyone friend requests. By this point, I'm like, okay, this is definitely weird. But things got really nuts when my cousin informed me that Stan had not only tried to friend her, but he'd also sent her a message asking all sorts of questions about me, such as things I liked or places I liked to go. My cousin was concerned that he was sending all these kind of messages to people who might actually tell him what he wanted to know. I debated sending Stan a message to tell him to back off, but decided just to block him and changed all my Facebook settings to make it as private as I possibly could. I also sent out a mass message to all my friends and family, informing them of the situation, and to kindly not give out any of my personal information. I was friends with James, but ended up blocking him as well, just to prevent Stan from getting access to anything. Things were quiet for about a week. Then, the friend requests from random accounts started coming in. Some didn't have pictures, some had random images, and they were accompanied by messages that made it clear that they were all from Stan. Full of skeevy comments on my looks and how he was wanting to hook up. And that's putting it mildly, to say the least. Every day I had an account that I needed to block. I contacted Facebook about the situation, though that didn't really help. It finally came to a stop when I threatened Stan with police intervention. My boyfriend at the time threatened to disembowel Stan and feed him his intestines with a side of fava beans and a nice Chianti. The peace lasted for about a year. Then I got a friend request from a girl I'd also gone to school with named Kelsey. We talked pretty frequently, both online and over the phone. She wanted us to hang out so we could talk about some things, but then she started bringing things up more frequently. I started to get that weird feeling again that something wasn't right. She kept wanting to hang out, and always at odd times. Then came the bombshell. Kelsey and Stan were dating. We'd all been in the same classes, so the fact that they knew each other wasn't strange. But for them to be dating, I confronted Kelsey about it and blocked her. But because we talked on the phone and they had my phone number, of course they both began calling and texting crazy things nonstop. I finally had to get a new number and change it. It's been over 10 years since all of this has happened, and I haven't heard from Stan once. Kelsey did try to friend me recently with a different account, and I looked through her Facebook and it shows she's married to another man and there's no evidence to Stan there. So I think I might, but I don't know. I don't think I'm taking any chances. About a year ago, I was on my way home from purchasing some groceries on a quiet, dark night. The way back home was fairly normal and nothing of note really happened. When it was time to unload and move everything to the house, I got this weird feeling that is hard to describe. Now, let me explain the way my street is set up. I live on a cul-de-sac in the suburbs. We also live across the train tracks, so it's usually fairly quiet unless the train is passing through and blaring. Because we only have street lights on the main road, every other road is left to be engulfed in darkness, unfortunately. As I'm offloading my groceries, my garage door is open and is the only light to be seen amongst the dark housing area. Observing the sky around me, I notice a figure walking up the street. It's merely a silhouette from the darkness, and the contrast of the light denies any fine details to be shown. But, for some reason, I felt fear. Whatever this thing is, it was walking on all fours. The thing has skinny and tall, slender legs. It may be seldom, but not surprising to see animals wandering out, as we do live by the woods as well. But I thought it was weird, as I had never seen an animal like that in this area before. The figure was unsettling to see, being alone in the night and all. Still curious, I saw the silhouette's neck move up, and I could tell it also had turned to look at me. Creeped out even more, I was ready to pack up as quick as possible. But then, the freaking thing starts approaching me. I want to say it ran, but I feel like that might be more of an exaggeration. Regardless, I shut off the light and closed my garage as quickly as possible and headed in for the night. I really did not want to meet whatever that freaking creature was. I was only 6 to 7 when this happened, but I remember everything. My mom had gone to work, so I stayed at home with my dad and little brother. My brother was playing with toys in the toy room while my dad and I were taking turns playing plug-and-play controllers. You will likely know what this is if you grew up in the early 2000s. Anyways, my dad had fallen asleep, so I ended up playing by myself. I was playing Mappy, a game about a mouse collecting artifacts and avoiding cats. I was pretty far into it, but my brother came up to me and wouldn't stop bothering me about something cool that he saw, and he wanted me to see it badly. I lost focus and ended up losing, so I said, "Fine, show me this stupid cool thing already," in the most annoyed tone a kid could give. Now, the one thing I left out about the toy room is that my dad had taken the door off and spun it around so that he could lock us in when we were bad. It was a pretty creepy room, mostly because it felt so empty and the light in the room was dim. My brother took me in the room and closed the door. I expected him to show me what he planned, but instead, he just turned around and smiled. I yelled at him over and over to show it to me, but he just kept smiling, and then eventually, the smile turned into a creepy laugh. I got tired of it and tried to leave the room to get back to my games, but it turns out my little brother locked the door. I yelled at him once more, but more aggressive this time. He just kept laughing. I started pounding on the door to wake my dad up. Then, I noticed my little brother had gone quiet. I turned around. He was now sitting on the toy slide we had in there. It was a small slide for babies, but he had a much more serious face. I actually got scared at that sight. He'd never made a face like that before. Then he looked up, and I did as well. He was looking at the vent on the ceiling. Then, I noticed something slowly starting to poke out. It was white, like paper white, and it was all wrinkly and veiny. If I had to describe it better, I'd say it looked like the forehead of a bald old man, slowly poking out, but the skin was just too white to be human. My eyes started to water and my brother began laughing again, louder than before. I started pounding on the door rapidly and screaming as loud as I could for my dad. I didn't dare look back again, but I heard it. I knew it wasn't human from the horrible sounds I had been making. My brother stopped laughing at that moment, but After that moment of me just pounding and nothing else, my brother let out a scream louder than I had ever heard. Like he was getting tortured. I still couldn't look back though. I was too scared. My crying and begging for the door to open just became louder. My dad then finally opened the door and I burst out. Only then did I look into the room, but there wasn't anything there, just my little brother crying and holding his leg. My dad went to check it out and he had a large deep cut on the side of his leg. I told my dad what happened, but he just gave me a hit in the back of the head for trying to lie, and my little brother, I could have sworn, had smiled at me again. But I didn't look too well, if I'm honest. I grew up starting to think it was just a nightmare, like I've been told every time I speak of this memory. And maybe it was, but my brother still has a scar on where I remember he had gotten cut, but I don't know if I believe it anymore.
So there was this guy in my closet I'd like to not meet again, but I'll start from the beginning and we can go from there. The first time I came face to face with this strange man was about 7 years ago. It was a normal summer day. Now I didn't have a terrible childhood, but I didn't have a great one either. My mother was struggling to make ends meet, and we lived in a really crappy 2-bedroom house. It was my mother, her boyfriend, my 2 younger brothers and myself. My mom worked nights, and so did her boyfriend, so it was up to me to watch my 2 brothers in the evening. It was just like any other normal summer day at first. My friends and I hung out during the day, walked around our small town, and enjoyed the warm weather. Now, for being a small town, there's still plenty to do. Walk through the woods, go to the park, all of the typical kids things. We decided to waste time at the park until I had to go home and watch my brothers. It was normal boring stuff. We walked around, played with a basketball that someone left behind, sat on the swings and talked about our lives and what we were going to do when we got older. It was nearing 3 p.m. when I noticed a guy sitting on the bench over by the basketball court. Now, it was nearing the time for me to go home anyways, and as the man was giving me and my friend both the odd vibe, we decided to leave. As we neared Main Street, which my house also happened to be on, we parted ways. I got home, and my mother lets me know that there's leftovers for the boys and myself, and then she's on her way to work. We spend most of the days indoors, watching TV or playing video games. Around 7:30, my brothers wanted to go outside to ride their bikes. It's just now getting dark, so I agree. They ride their bikes for a half hour. I'm sitting on the curb looking at my phone, texting my friend about how bored I am, when my youngest brother, who must have been around 7 at the time, comes up to me and points over towards our house. I look just in time to see what looked like a man walk inside. I immediately tell my brothers not to worry and continue riding their bikes as I call my mother, letting her know what just happened. She calls the police and they show up within 5 minutes, seeing that the police station is only a few blocks away. They do a full search of the home but find nothing. They speak to my mother on the phone and tell her there's nothing there, and it must have just been our imaginations. Tentatively, my brothers and I go back into the house. So I sit them down and turn on the TV. Time flies, and I look up and it's already 9:30, and I really got to get them to bed soon. I head upstairs to go into our closet. All 3 of us share one bedroom, so all of our clothes are in one closet. I turn the closet light on and start digging through a pile of clothes on the floor that we never got around to putting away. I hear a noise that sounds like a deep breath. Thinking it was just my imagination, I continue to pull out pajamas for my brothers. I grab their PJs and go to pull the string to turn off the lights. Out of the corner of my eye, I see movement. I look over and see a face peering out of the large pile of clothes. There's a man hiding under our clothes in the closet. He made a sudden movement, and I booked it. I take off running. I can hear him struggling to get out of the clothes, and I didn't stop running. Down the hallway, down the stairs, knocking anything over in the process, in hopes of slowing him down. I burst into the living room and grabbed my brother's arms, practically pulling them out of the sockets in an attempt to drag them out of the house. We were outside and 3 blocks away before I quit dragging them behind me. I reached for my phone to call the police, but it's not in my pocket. I must have left it on the couch. So we hoofed it. I dragged my brothers behind me in the middle of the night. They are tired, and they don't know what happened, and I won't tell them. They didn't need to know. They would never want to go into that closet ever again. I get to the police station and they call our mother. Then they drive us home, and she leaves work early. They do another full search, but once again find nothing but the mess I made in my attempt to leave. No evidence. Nothing. They basically told me to stop wasting their time, and they left. My mother said she believed me, but of course I knew it was just something she would say to console me. She says I could stay the night at a friend's if I can get a hold of someone, just to make me feel better. We all go inside, and my mom sends my brothers to get cleaned up for bed. I walk over to the couch where I left my phone. It wasn't there though. It was on the floor smashed to pieces. It was very obvious that it was smashed by a hammer, seeing as the hammer was sitting right next to it. I call my mother over and show her the mess of my phone on the ground. She walks over to the storage cabinet and pulls down the toolbox we have. She opens it, and our hammer is still inside. I didn't realize what that meant at the time, but now that I think about it, that man was in our home, in my closet, in my room, with a hammer, just waiting and hoping for me and my brothers to fall asleep. This happened May of last year. I was staying with my ex-mother-in-law for the past year while my son and I got back on our feet after leaving my abusive ex. She lives in a fairly decent neighborhood, not one of those rich ones with HOA, but not one of the crackhead ones either, just a simple mid-class neighborhood. Back in March and April, there had been reports on our neighborhood site about some cars being broken into, presumably by kids. Not a huge deal, and after not keeping anything important in my car anyways, we all kind of brushed it off. One night I was feeling pretty sick, and she offered to watch my son if I wanted to go downstairs for the night. Grateful for the offer, I accepted and made my way downstairs. At this point I feel like I should explain more about the layout. Upstairs is a finished 3 bedrooms, 2 bath style house. The downstairs is a garage that was finished and turned into 3 extra bedrooms. 2 of the bedrooms are off to the left side, and the other one is on the other side. You have to pass the laundry room and a storage room to get to the other one, which is the one I slept in. This room is completely closed off from the rest of the house. In the storage room, there is a door that leads outside. This door is kept deadbolted and chained at all times. Keep this in mind. So I climb in bed. It's probably 9-ish, and I fall asleep fairly quickly. The rest of this is kind of a blur. At some point of the night, I start hearing noises, which I brush off as someone walking around upstairs, and go back asleep. The noises wake me up a few more times, before I realize that they're in the room. At this point, I think a cat must have gotten into the room. So I didn't get up, but I glanced around the room, and I could see almost the entire room from where I was laying. Over by the window, I see a white thing moving. I realized that the cat had just followed me down, without me noticing. Aggravated, I go to get up, and I realize what I'm seeing. It's not our white cat. It's not even a cat at all. It's the curtain and something coming through the window. At this point I froze. I didn't know what to do. I just laid there and watched someone climb through the window and stand up. He was wearing a hat and stood at average male height. I could tell he was looking my way, but I couldn't make any features out. He walked over to my bed and leaned over till we were face to face. I didn't know if he could see my eyes open. I wanted to scream and say something, but I knew nobody could hear me upstairs. My heart was pounding, and it took everything I had to stay still and not scream. I didn't know what to do. The man was less than a foot away from my face as he leaned over my bed. I thought about making a move or saying something, but I couldn't make my mouth or body move. I was just paralyzed. He then turned and walked away out of the room. I heard the deadbolt to the door outside click, and the door opened, and he left. I heard him then come and close the window. I realized the noises I heard earlier was him prying the window open. I called my ex-mother-in-law as I was hysterical and so scared to move. She didn't believe me. She told me everything was locked up and it was just a nightmare. I got up and checked the window to find it had been pried open. She finally came downstairs, and the door that leads to the outside was unlocked. All 3 locks were undone. This is the point that she realized that I wasn't making this up. We never figured out who it was, or what they wanted, and we haven't had any issues since then. So to get into the neighborhood I grew up in, you have to drive down this old dirt road for a couple of miles and past some small farms. Right outside of our neighborhood entrance was a spooky house that was surrounded by a cluster of giant oak trees. A red and white Jeep from the 1960s sat outside, and there were never any lights on, and the blinds were always closed. Well, I ended up meeting the guy that lived there several times. Sometimes he slowly followed me in his Jeep while I was on my bike. One time he showed up at my house to watch me jump on my mini trampoline in my front yard and grabbed me by my arm. Other times he would sit in his Jeep at 6 a.m. and stare at me while I stood at the bus stop. My Uncle Dave is super awesome in a really goofy sort of way. He's always playing pranks on me. He once convinced me that a hot pepper was a pickle and got me to chow down on one of the chilies, which prompted me to wash my own mouth out with soap in the restroom. He lived in Connecticut, and when my family moved down south to this neighborhood, we didn't see him much. One weekend, after several encounters with that creepy guy, Uncle Dave announced that he was coming over to visit and would be staying in our guest room. My mom let me stay up and wait for him to arrive. However, seeing me fall asleep on the couch several times, she ordered me to go to bed and said I could see Uncle Dave when I woke up. In the middle of the night, I woke up with an eerie feeling. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and goosebumps covered my body. I had this uneasy feeling of being watched. Stiff as a board, not trying to move my head, I announced to the watcher that I am awake and aware of its existence. I moved my eyes around the room to look for anything out of the ordinary. My nightlight was in the corner of the room, which created a pretty decent glow in the room. It was really easy to make out my Beanie Baby collection, my desk, my dresser, and the man crouched next to my dresser. Okay, what the hell, my little mind thought. I could see a guy with dark hair sitting with his back against the wall, and his right side leaning against my dresser. His knees were pulled close to his body, and I could see his teeth and the whites of his eyes gleaming. He was facing me. I stared at him for a long time, and he didn't move. At first, I was terrified. Then I remembered Uncle Dave. Of course, he always plays pranks on me. It's his life mission. He's probably trying to trick me again. If I cry or scream, he'll jump up laughing and will shout, "Gotcha!" I can't let Uncle Dave win. I stared at him for a while, and he didn't move a muscle. He never gave up the game. It felt like hours, and I felt a sense of dread fill me. As much as Uncle Dave loves pranking me, I can't picture him staying up all night to do this weird, creepy prank. A small voice in my head tried to convince me that it was someone else, not Uncle Dave. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I peeked and saw that the man was still there. He wasn't a figment of my imagination. I closed my eyes and imagined myself shouting for my mom and how she dashed to rescue me. Even if it was my Uncle Dave, I wanted no part of this prank. At some point, after hours of adrenaline, I crashed and fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I immediately checked my dresser and saw no one. Feeling relief wash over me, I felt fully convinced it was Uncle Dave being dumb again. Leaping out of bed and rushing out of my room, I ran into the living room, gleefully shouting, "Ha ha, Uncle Dave, you didn't get me. That was the dumbest prank ever." My mom turned to me with a weird look on her face and told me that Uncle Dave was still in Connecticut because his flight was delayed. I figured my mom was just in on the prank and told her what happened, insisting that Uncle Dave was there. When she shook her head no, I felt a wave of horror flash over me as I tried to figure out who that was in my room. My mom told me I was just imagining things and she wouldn't entertain me. Flash forward a bit later. I'm again in bed, my nightlight's on. I somehow forgot about the creepy man and was more focused on stuff like Captain Planet and Game Boy. I woke up in the middle of the night with the same eerie feeling. I checked by the dresser, but didn't see anything. Feeling relieved, I settled back into bed and counted sheep. While laying there, I saw a slender hand creep up the side of my comforter from under the bed. It felt around, looking for something to grab onto. At that second, every alarm system in my body was screaming, except for my mouth. I tried so many times to open my mouth and shout, but nothing would come out. I felt paralyzed. The hand was on my bed for probably 5 minutes, but it felt like the longest 5 minutes of my life. I lay there petrified and fantasizing about running out of my room or calling for my mom, but I couldn't get my mouth or legs to work. Instead, I laid there, frozen like a wuss. I was eventually able to call for my mom, but in the middle of me shouting, "Mom!" my nightlight turned off. I don't remember what happened after that, but I think I fainted from fright. When I woke up, I stood up on my bed and took a flying leap, then ran out of my room to tell my mom what happened. My dad checked under my bed, and again told me it was just my imagination. Despite my mom trying to convince me I was crazy, I was firmly convinced that the man had been in my room not once, but twice. After that, I would start springing for my bedroom door and take a flying leap mid-room, landing with a thud on my bed. I was convinced if I did not do this, if I walked up to my bed like a normal person, someone hiding under my bed would grab my ankles. I had a bed skirt on my bed, so it was impossible to look underneath for any creepy lurkers. As time went on, other things happened. Some person stood in the pitch black of my backyard one night and made human meowing noises at my window. Someone tapped on my window. The screen of my window had been pried open, and I saw the red Jeep parked in front of my house several times. When I finally told my mom about the red Jeep, she went white and started making all these phone calls. Apparently, the guy who lived in the dark house had previously been accused of raping a child, but was never convicted, but was convicted of indecent exposure. The court took away his driver's license and had him register as a sex offender. When my mom heard that he was violating his conditions and following kids in the neighborhood in his car, she called the cops. The cops went to his house and ended up searching it. Inside, they found this weird wooden chair with a large hole on the seat. Allegedly, the guy would ask the neighborhood farm girls to sit on the chair, and he would just lay on the ground underneath the chair, looking up their dresses. Sometimes he would ask farm children to defecate through the hole, and would promise gifts. One kid got a new bike out of it. Apparently all of the kids from the farms knew about this guy and his chair, but never reported him because they like getting free stuff. I don't know what his name is or where he is now. I tried Googling some keywords with my old neighborhood to see if anything pops up, but could never find anything. I also have no idea if he was a guy in my room, but after hearing about him and remembering how he would follow me to my house in his Jeep, I became pretty convinced he was a guy who had hid in my room twice. It was early July. I had just begun my senior year of college, but was home for the summer. While at home, I met Lisa on Tinder. Lisa lived in the same town as my college and invited me to come stay with her for the weekend. I happily obliged because that booty. The weekend with Lisa went great. We started dating. I returned a couple weeks later. It's now late July or early August 2012. My housing for the upcoming year was going to be in our fraternity housing, off campus. We had a main house, the big house, and a smaller house in the backyard, the little house. I needed to clean up the little house as I was going to move into it, since it was left pretty filthy by the previous tenants. Lisa offered to help, so we spent most of our time in there. The little house was stockpiled with furniture that people had left for the summer instead of taking home. There were probably 6 or 7 couches stuffed into a teeny living room, so you literally had to hop from one to another to navigate the room, which we made a game of it. and made great use of them during the weekend. Sorry, bros. To give you an idea of the layout, the little house was a ranch-style brick home with 3 adjacent bedrooms at the back of the house and a kitchen and living room at the front. The front door entered directly into the living room. The side door, if entering the home, was off to the right, on the far side of the kitchen. In the living room was one large 6x8 glass window covered with blackout curtains at the front of the house. Okay, so here's the story. It's late, probably around 11 p.m. Lisa and I were tuckered out, and we cuddled up on one of the couches to watch the London Olympics. She dozed off, head on my chest, and I'm left there happily pinned down. Suddenly, the front doorknob starts to shake. I'm caught off guard because it's summer in an empty college town and we weren't expecting anyone. It stops for a moment, then the doorknob shakes more violently this time. Thankfully, it's locked. As I prepare to slide out from under Lisa to investigate, 3 loud bangs against the door as if someone was trying to kick it open. Their attempt failed. I'm partially relieved, but I'm still aware that there are 2 doors that they could enter. Lisa is awake now, delirious and frantic. What's going on? What was that? I hushed her and told her to get up and go to the back of the house and to go into the bedroom and lock the door until I personally came to get her. She refused, but I demanded. She scurried across the couches and locked herself in the back room. I ran to the far side of the kitchen to make sure the side door was locked. It is. Okay, we're alright for now. Thinking to myself, weapon, what can I use? Shit, I wish I had a gun. Maybe the brothers left something. Shotgun would be ideal. I see a hunting bow with a few arrows. No, that's too cumbersome. Keep looking. Golf club. 6-iron. Perfect. Everything is silent, aside from the pounding heartbeat and the faint sound of Lisa calling the cops from the back room. I'm standing in the kitchen and have a view of the front door and the side door while clutching the golf club, when suddenly the side door knob starts shaking and there's a couple of bangs at the door. Lisa screams from the back of the house and I yell at the intruder. We're in here. We called the cops. They'll be here any second. Leave us alone. The banging stops. It's silent. Dead silent. We wait for the cops to come. Lisa and I are in the living room, full of couches. 2 full hours pass. It's now something like 2:30, and still no signs of the cops. I'm both exhausted from the adrenaline crash, and angry that the cops had not come. We call them again. 911, what's your emergency? Hi. We called about 2 hours ago to report an intruder, but no cops ever came. Are you still in the home? Did the intruders make it inside? Yes, we're inside. They didn't get in, but I'm scared that they're going to come back. The operator asked me for my address. I'm literally spelling out my address. The front door gets slammed, kicked again. I holler at the 911 operator. They're back. Please help. Hurry. Officers are on the way. Stay on the phone. Keep away from the windows and doors. Lisa is freaking out. I'm freaking out, wielding a golf club again. And suddenly, the entire front window, all 6x8, shatters to pieces. The glass is mostly contained by the black curtains. And I screamed the girliest, most blood-curdling scream I could imagine. I stood up and started swinging the golf club wildly, hoping to make contact with whatever or whoever was coming into the house. Moments later we hear sirens, and I could faintly see the blue lights swirling outside through the split in the curtains. A megaphone announces the police presence. They scour the area, and eventually knock on the door. Apparently, someone did try to kick down both doors, and there are boot prints to prove it. The window was shattered by a malt liquor bottle. They ended up finding a drunk dude from the trailer park nearby, who had been roaming the area. I bought a gun the next day. So first of all, let me tell you how the story began in March of 2017. I am a 19-year-old male. My family and I moved to a new house in March 2017. I was really excited because this house was huge. and had a beautiful garden with a pool and a hot tub. I'm not bragging about this information. It will be important later. When we moved in, the real estate agent told my parents that there had been a series of home invasions in our street, and that our house and our neighbor's house were the only ones which hadn't been broken in yet. The first weird thing started to happen in May 2017. My room is at the patio, so when I look out my window, I can see the patio and the hot tub. At first, I could hear the gate of our garden being opened at night. This continued for the next 10 weeks. Sometimes we would go outside in the morning, and all our lamps were bashed in. It's like our property is haunted by a poltergeist, since we haven't seen anybody do these things. At first we thought some burglars are opening our garden gate at night, because every morning my parents open the patio door so our dog can go outside and pee, while my parents would get dressed to go for a morning walk. So I guess the burglars were hoping that our dog would run off so they would have it easy to enter our home. All of these incidents made my mom feel really unsafe in our own house. All of a sudden it stopped, so we thought the person who did this moved on or got bored. But after 5 months, everything started over again, but worse. It's November, and I wake up to hear footsteps outside my window. So I open my eyes and wish I wouldn't have done that. The moment I was so scared of actually happened. What I saw was a 6'3" man standing outside my window, watching me while I was asleep. He looked so old, yet so young. He had this young face, but his haircut made him look 25 years older. At least that's what I could see in the dark. I was frozen. I couldn't move. So we just looked each other in the eyes for what felt like an eternity. Suddenly he ran off, so I took my chance and ran to my parents' room and told them everything. My dad grabbed his gun, which he is keeping at home now because he got worried over the last few months. He is a police officer. He ran outside but couldn't find the man, but found a broken gate, so he called the police. The police came, but they couldn't do much, and they left rather quickly. 2 months later, I woke up to splashing sounds. I got up and looked outside my window. I noticed the sounds were coming from the pool, but I couldn't see it due to the trees blocking my view. So I shrugged it off, because I thought there was just something wrong with the pump, which wasn't a rare thing. So I went back to bed, but I had a hard time falling back to sleep. The sounds grew louder and more intense, so I got up and went into the living room, which allows me to see the entire garden. When I look outside, I got the same feeling which I had 2 months ago when I spotted the guy outside my window. Anyway, I looked outside and saw the same man standing in our pool, draining the pool with a small cup, and I mean it how I said it. He was standing in our pool with a cup, throwing water onto the grass. He had a dead stare in his eyes like he didn't even know what he was doing. He noticed me watching and just smiled at me. I woke my dad up immediately, and we called the police. They left as fast as they came, since they didn't find anything but our empty pool. They said it was probably a homeless guy, and he was washing himself. But I'm certain that he was not just washing himself. It's now August 2018. I've noticed weird cars in front of our house lately, and if someone would spot them, they would drive off. My parents left me alone this weekend, since it was my uncle's birthday. I didn't want to come along, so I decided to stay home. I got bored all alone in this big home, so I called a couple friends of mine to come hang out at my place. They came around 7 p.m., and we started drinking some wine and listening to music. Time passes and it was now 11 p.m. when we heard someone knocking on our window of our living room. I thought I was imagining the knocks, but my friend looked at me like they were about to ask if I was expecting someone else. I turned off the music and listened, but all we heard was silence. I turned on the patio lights when a girlfriend of mine yelled, "Hey, there's someone running." I didn't see anyone, but I heard the gate slam shut. I was worried, but decided not to call the cops, since they couldn't do anything anyway. I was really glad that my friend drank something and had to crash at my place, so I wouldn't be at home alone that night. Today is Saturday, and my friends left around 5 p.m. I was in my room when I heard something fall in my bathroom, so I got up to see what it was. When I walked towards my bathroom, I could see a person right behind the door. This person didn't know I spotted him, so I walked back into my room, got my phone, and called the police and my parents. When I passed the bathroom door, I saw the person was still in there. So I opened my camera and took a picture as proof for my family and friends. When I took the photo, my dumbass didn't think about the flash. So when I took the pic, the light illuminated the entire bathroom, and the door slammed shut. I thought this was my chance to abandon the house completely, so I ran out of the house and called the police. They arrived about 10 minutes later. They went inside and came up with the same man who was terrorizing my family for over a year now, half naked. The police said he was in the bathroom, just staring at the drain. He was constantly saying, "The cult elderly will eliminate you." Right now I'm sitting in my room, writing this story, and worrying about the cult he was talking about. Were the suspicious cars in the front of my house part of the cult, or was he just an insane man? The entire event doesn't seem to make much sense, and I don't know what is yet to come, but my family and I will be moving again in December. Thank God. This all happened when I was about 16. I was in high school and working at my first part-time job at a fast food restaurant. It was located off a highway and wasn't uncommon to get a lot of crazy customers. I arrived at work one day and was surprised to see that my schedule that week had changed, giving me a graveyard shift on Friday night. The thought of being at this place overnight gave me the creeps, and I thought my manager was insane by making the youngest employee take that night shift. But it wasn't a school night, and I didn't want to seem like a baby, so I just accepted it. When the night came, it was just me and another coworker, who was a larger man and was very friendly, so it made me feel safe and comfortable with him there. Before leaving, my manager gave me a rundown on how the night was supposed to go. At 11 o'clock I was to lock the doors, and we would only be taking drive-thru orders. But on this particular night, just my luck, one of the main door had been broken and wouldn't lock properly. If anyone comes in, just tell them they can't be in the lobby and they have to order through the drive-thru. After these words of wisdom, my manager went home to the comfort of his bed, and I started my long night. Being slightly paranoid and not used to the new shift, every noise I heard outside made me jump. A few times, some customers came in through the unlocked door, but quickly and politely left after being asked to go through the drive-thru. When it reached 1 a.m. in the morning, I was in the back of the store organizing boxes when I heard the slam of the heavy door close. I ran to the front to tell whoever it was that they needed to leave, but I saw no one. I walked into the lobby and looked all around, but didn't see anyone. "Did you hear someone come in?" I asked my coworker, as he also came to investigate. "Maybe they left. I'll check the bathroom to be safe," he said, as he opened the men's bathroom, then quickly came out. "Nope, no one in here. You should go check the girls' bathroom." I agreed and opened the door to the women's bathroom. At first I didn't see anything, so I called out, "Anyone in here?" No response. To double check, I needed to take a few steps into the bathroom, and at this time I was able to see some feet behind the stall. The stall door was wide open, and as I got closer, I was able to see inside. My stomach instantly sank. I caught the eye of a woman with long tangled brown hair crouched next to the toilet with a needle in her arm. She jumped up out of surprise and ripped the needle out of her arm, squirting blood all over the floor. She raised the needle over her head and started to move towards me. I let out a scream and ran out as fast as I could, past my coworker. I whipped around just in time to see her running out the front door. My heart was racing and I was scared to death and ended up going home right after. I quit the next day. Last July I was home alone, and my family was in Riverside visiting my aunt. I live in a high crime rate neighborhood in Los Angeles. It was 4 in the morning, and I had just got back from a friend's birthday party, so I decided to watch some television in hopes that it would make me a little sleepy. Halfway through watching Hellboy, I hear the side door to the kitchen open. At first, I thought my family had just decided to come home instead of staying at my aunt's. I hear someone walk through the kitchen, the dining room, and the footsteps stop as they reach the beginning of the living room. I was laying down on the couch, furthest from the entrance of the living room, and could not tell who it was. I tried sitting up to see who it was, but I didn't get a glimpse. Thought my little brother was the one that walked in the living room. And so I get up to see what's taking my family so long to get inside the house. I hear footsteps, quickly leaving back out the side door. And I was shocked to realize that the family car was not in the driveway. I get extremely nervous and decide to call my dad to see what's going on. My heart sank when I found out the family was still in Riverside. I turned the outside light on, and I checked how it was possible for someone to get in. The door is spotless, and I couldn't find any signs that someone forced open the door. I checked my pockets to see if I had dropped the house key, but it was still in my jacket. I checked the whole house and made sure all the doors and windows were properly closed. I didn't think to call the police, because as long as nothing was missing, I was fine. Even if I did call the police, they probably would not have caught the crazy guy, because it's not common to find the junkies, gangsters, and common thief hanging around my neighborhood. The next day my family shows up, and I tell them what happened. My parents were shocked at first, but quickly got over it. Sometimes I still wonder how that person opened the door to my house, and why none of the house keys were missing, and the whole house was sealed up. The worst part though has to be that the person walked into my living room, and I did not realize someone had broken in.
Sit back, because this story is a bit long. To give you some idea of who I am, I'm a big nerd. Star Wars, Marvel and DC, etc. But I'm also a big horror guy. I watch and listen to as much horror as I possibly can. Every time I watch or listen to these stories, I usually hear the stories of groups of friends going out to this old, abandoned 1800s building that was used to execute prisoners or was the scene of a murder. Regular spooky stuff, right? Maybe even add a Ouija board in there just for added effect. Well, I've always wanted to go to one of those places. But in Redacted, they aren't exactly easy to find. We got a haunted hotel in Redacted. Maybe an abandoned shed near highway, also Redacted. With a bus buried in the dirt nearby to hide the scene of a murder. It's not a lot though. Now I live in a small town in the middle of nowhere. We got a few local stores, a Walmart, a small theater that opened up again recently. It has some interesting things, but once you live here for almost a decade, you start to get bored. Even traveling to the cities that are about an hour away is now only good for going to restaurants that are better than the 2 McDonald's in my town, and movies that deserve to be watched somewhere other than what we got here. I enjoy hanging out with my group of fellow nerds and doing goofy stuff, but I've always wanted to do what those groups of friends in the stories I read do. I have suggested the idea to go somewhere haunted, but my friends are more interested in just going to local stores and screwing around. During the spring break of this year, however, I managed to convince them. We were in our group chat, with 2 of our friends arguing about who was more bored. They aren't exactly the most social, or athletically positive people in the world. When I asked all of them if they wanted to go somewhere to mess around, not surprisingly, the 2 bored people said no, but my other 5 friends were intrigued. One of my friends, Eric, asked me, "What do you have in mind?" I messaged back that we would go somewhere abandoned, which then my other friends gave their reactions to the idea. "You always say that," said John. "That's your thing, my guy," said Anthony. "I'll spare you the other reactions since you probably get the picture." I messaged back saying that it'd be fun, and that we have nothing else to do at the moment. It took a few minutes before they finally messaged back, agreeing to come with me to, well, wherever we were going. My other friend, Alex, started researching abandoned places in the area, and eventually found an abandoned house in the middle of the desert. He said it was an old house someone made during the California gold rush, while looking for gold in the very early 1850s. No murders or deaths from what Alex could find. The place also had a few smaller structures around. Everyone agreed with the location, and the 6 of us decided to head out around 2 p.m., since we're not stupid enough to go out there at night by ourselves. John, Alex, and Eric were there before me, but Anthony and my other friend Sam decided to show up late. Before the 6 of us started walking, we started listing off what we brought along. There were flashlights with extra batteries, some food, one of us brought a flare, most of us brought knives, and also some spare clothes just in case. We started trekking over to the wooded house about 100 yards away, stepping over bushes, rocks, and whistle pig holes. Eric tripped on a rock at one point, and we of course joked around about it. We weren't exactly worried. It's not like we would be killed like some horror movie. We got to the front yard of the house. Actually, it was more of a cabin than anything, and it was made of rotten wood from now non-existent trees in the area. There was a scorched area nearby from past campfires the owner must have lit. And there was also a shed made from the same decaying wood as the cabin in front of it, which had the door slightly ajar. Not wanting to act like a bunch of dumb teens, we stuck together and started inching towards the slightly open wooden door. We did a 6-way rock, paper, scissors game to figure out who would go in first, and John was lucky enough to lose. Alex messed with John a little bit, jokingly saying, "Oh no, don't get spooked by the boogeyman." John doesn't scare easily, so he just walked up to the door and pushed it open. From the squeaking sound of the rusted hinges, it sounded like the door was about to fall off. And as a matter of fact, it did. It slammed hard onto the chipped wooden planks that made up the floor, and all of us jumped. We didn't know if we were alone, but if someone else was hiding, they knew that we were here. The group slowly started filing in one by one into the first room, flashlights in hand. Anthony was scared out of his mind after the door fell, so he had his dad's hunting knife out. It seemed like we were in the living room, with pieces of furniture laying around in a mess, shredded pillows laying on top of them. There was also a wooden table flipped to its side, small wooden sculptures laying around next to it. We weren't really surprised about how much of a mess the place was, but we were still a bit on edge with how surprisingly dark it was, even in the daylight. We passed the gutted kitchen and the stone top island in the middle to the surprisingly large hallway. This was the parts where we all took out our weapons, and got into a defensive position. We slowly trudged along, the wood creaking under our feet with each step, looking into the flipped rooms with open cabinets and stripped beds. There weren't any windows back here, so we relied on our lights to see. John kept looking forward, with me, Alex, and Anthony looking left, and Sam and Eric looked right. Things were thrown about the rooms, some things intact, and some things absolutely shattered. Even if the items were in perfect condition, we still couldn't tell what they were supposed to be, and we had no intent on checking. We decided to walk into the final room at the end of the hallway. It seemed like the master bedroom, due to a larger torn bed sitting on the right side of the room, and a small shelf unit with a broken mirror on top, that sat to the left near the doorway. It pretty much just looked like a larger version of the other rooms, with a few extra things, including an eerie painting of the area on a dark and stormy night, the shadows in between the trees fading into the infinite black abyss. We assumed it was painted by the late owner of the house. We were all creeped out, but still remained calm. For about half a minute, we were all looking around in different directions until we heard John scream at the top of his lungs. Being the great friends we were, we all booked it through the hallway and out the front door, jumping over the door on the ground. Anthony made it out first, then Alex, then me, and finally Eric and Sam. Only when we got outside did we look behind us to see if John was okay. He was, but he tripped on the steps coming towards us. We were all freaking out while asking John what happened. He said he just got scared by a spider crawling around. Our fear then turned into anger, complaining to John that we thought he was getting murdered. We quickly dropped the subject and jogged over to the shed, now with John in the middle of the group. I checked the time and realized that our rides would show up in about an hour, so I told him that we would need to speed up a bit so we can check the last building. They listened and picked up the pace a bit. The dilapidated shed looked pretty normal. Shelves of rusted tools and other miscellaneous things were all over the room. We didn't want to stay there for long, for fear of John freaking out over another frickin' bug. There was one more building to look at. We had no clue what the structure was for, but we assumed it might have been another cabin. Eric, our new lead, led us to the front door, which already had its door taken off the hinges. It was odd, though, that the door was nowhere to be seen from where we were. We didn't worry though, and proceeded to walk in. It wasn't what we were expecting. It looked like a barn house, with stalls stretched across the back wall. Again, there were no lights, so we spread the lights from our flashlights to cover the whole room. There were hooks on the side walls with stuff that looked like cloth on it, but we didn't want to get close enough to confirm our suspicions. We started checking the stalls one by one, with nothing interesting to see. Until the third to last stall. I believe Sam looked at the stall first, and saw the missing door leaning sideways against the wall. It wasn't the door that made him curious, it was how it was leaning on the wall. It almost looked like something was behind it. Sam barked at us to come over to him, to look at what was behind it. As soon as Sam finished his sentence, we all heard the door slam to the ground. We looked at Sam's terrified face as he looked at the stall before he immediately bolted to the door. We followed close behind him. First Eric, then John, then Anthony, then Alex, and finally me. Before I made it through the door, however, I heard a thud near me and I felt something tugging at my pant leg. I rotated around to point my light at the floor. There on the floor was a man in ragged clothing that was covered in dark splotches, and had a long beard and long dirty hair. He had no shoes or socks on, and had some sort of pouch to his side. His pale face was so thin that I could see the outlines of his cheekbones clearly. It was obvious that he was trying to live off the food of the land, and failing miserably. The thing that terrified me the most were his eyes. His bloodshot eyes were opened as wide as they could, and were pitch black, leading into a dark abyss like the shadows of the painting in the cabin. I saw no soul behind those eyes, only insanity and potential bloodlust. My body went cold as I looked at the eyes of what looked like a monster to me. After being paralyzed for a moment from shock, I put all my force into kicking him with the leg that he grabbed. I heard a crack as I hit him square in his thin, pale face. He gave out a loud yelp, but still held on. I kept kicking and kicking, until he finally let go after he started reaching for his pouch. As soon as I was free, I ran as fast as I could towards my friends, who were now around 50 yards away. I then knew how John felt earlier. Everything in my body ached as I kept going, not looking back for fear of seeing that man again. I started feeling sick as I jumped over bushes and rocks and holes. I yelled at my friends to keep going, and to head for the road, since the sun was setting and I knew that our parents were coming to get us soon. Once we were all at the road, all 6 of us turned to the cabin, flashlights out and weapons drawn. The man was nowhere to be seen, so we assumed that he was back in the stalls. It didn't give us much comfort though. We were all pale with fear, but my body was frozen in place, my brain trying to figure out what had just happened. I then remembered the man was reaching for his pouch. What was in there? Why was he reaching for it? Was it a weapon? If not, what would it be? I kept thinking about this until we were illuminated with the vehicle's lights as they pulled up. It was Sam's mom. His mom put down the window and told him to get in, which Sam then refused. He said that they weren't leaving until our parents were here. She was confused for a moment, until she noticed us with our weapons out. She asked Sam what happened, and he explained everything. I told her about the man in the stalls, and her eyes widened. She commanded us to get in, but we didn't want to get stuck in a vehicle while the man was still nearby. We stayed outside until all of our parents showed up. Individually, we told our parents what happened, about the man. Eric's dad then began to call the police, while Anthony's dad got out of the truck and pulled out his concealed firearm. We all waited until the police showed up a while later, around 8 p.m. They moved up to the cabin, and were about to start searching, until the man from the stall ran out of the building and tried running out into the desert. The police took him down without lethal force, but he still tried fighting back. One of the officers came over to our group to talk to us. The first thing he asked is if we got close to the man at any point. Sam said he was sort of close to him, but then I chimed in saying that he grabbed my leg. He said that I was definitely lucky, since they found a jagged and rusted knife in a pouch that he had on his side. My blood went cold when the officer told me that information. The main question that was running through my head the whole time we were waiting was true. The man could have killed me, or at least stabbed me. My friends were already gone when he grabbed me, so no one would have been there to save me if I didn't get him off. Once the man was in the squad car, some other officers went to check his stall. Turns out he wasn't the only thing in there. There was also a corpse, torn to pieces. It also turns out that he hung the pieces of the person on the hooks. which is why there were pieces of material on it. The man was a cannibal, and killed some random person that came over here to explore, and they also didn't bring a weapon, which was why they couldn't protect themselves when they were potentially caught off guard by the cannibal. I'll spare you the rest of what happened, since it was just things wrapping up. But let me tell you this, do not go to an abandoned place alone and without proper equipment, because you don't know what or who is there. This whole ordeal replays in my mind, and it shakes me to my core, that if I would have gone by myself, and without anything to protect myself, I would have been the next person to be put on that hook. What I am about to do is not so much tell a story, but recall the memory of an event. This happened about 10 years ago, so some details are a little fuzzy. However, I still recall the main incidents very clearly, and probably will for the rest of my life. I know this is how a lot of creepypastas start, and there is nothing I can do to convince you what I'm about to tell you is real, but I'm not going to let that stop me from telling the story of the most terrifying and stupid decision I've made in my life. I've written a few horror stories before, but nothing I've dreamed up can compare to the absolute dread I felt that night about a decade ago. I'll start off by saying that Pinewood Cemetery is not the real name of the place. That's the name the locals of the area call it. I won't say the real name, because I don't want people to go there for two reasons. The first one is that it has a very long history of vandalism, so cops will arrest you on the spot, and the owners of the place will press charges, whether you were there to vandalize or not. The second reason is that I've talked about what my friends and I saw there to people more knowledgeable about the occult and spirit world, and they've told me that the things we saw and heard were far from harmless. I don't want anyone's life ruined, because they heard my story and wanted to check the place out for themselves. So, back in the summer of 2009, my friends and I decided we wanted to visit the cemetery at night. I'm obviously not going to use our real names, so we'll call my friends Jimmy, Edgar, Keith, and I'll be referring to myself as Carl for this. We were typical bored 18 and 19-year-olds, living in an upscale suburbia with nothing to do but get high or drunk or both, and try to find something to occupy our time besides video games. The town we lived in is mostly filled with older people, so it doesn't offer much variety of nighttime activities for its younger citizens. Edgar and I were, and still are, very big fans of horror things. One night in late May, I believe, after we had smoked a bunch of pot and were just hanging out, he suggested something. He told me that he and some other friends of ours had previously gone to this place called Pinewood Cemetery, a supposed hotbed of spiritual activity. I wasn't buying it at first, but then he showed me a picture on his phone from the last time he'd been there. In the picture, at the bottom of the frame, you could see some of his head and our friend Bill's head. They were at one of the cemetery famous spots, a headless statue of an angel. They were there that night, and this was the era of flip phones, so they had to use the phone's flash in order to get the picture. When I first saw the picture, a chill ran down my spine, though I was far too proud and stupid to let it show. Behind my two friends' heads was the statue, and through a combination of the natural darkness of night and mixed with the shadows created by the phone's flash, the inky blackness took shape of a human skull. This skull wasn't a fully formed skull, as it was missing the lower jaw, but there was no mistaking the black outline of a cranium, cheekbones, and even the upper jaw, where some teeth could be seen. There were even eye sockets and slits for where the nose should be, and those were filled with the dull gray of the statue that stood behind the two. To this day, that photo is still the freakiest thing I've seen in my life. I immediately agreed we had to go. Now, up to this point, I had been some sort of hunting ghosts for a long time. I had a morbid curiosity, and had tried various things from Ouija boards to seances, to try and make contact with the dead. Nothing had worked up to that point, and it had been a while since my desire to find proof of life beyond death had bubbled up to my conscious mind. After seeing my friend's photo, a new spark ignited, and I immediately started making plans for the trip. Edgar and I managed to convince our friends Jimmy and Keith to come along. Neither were as much into horror as we were, but it was something to do on a Saturday night, and it would be a good excuse to get out of our boring town and do something that might actually be exciting. So near the end of May, after Edgar, Keith, and I smoked some pot, we hopped in Jimmy's car and began our first excursion to Pine Woods. I know now that diving into the world of the occult and spirits, when you aren't sober, is stupid to say the least. But we were young and dumb, and I don't think any of us truly believed Pine Woods was haunted. Sure, we'd heard spooky stories about the place, and had some other friends who'd been there to tell us about their freaky experiences, but no one ever said, "Yeah, I went there and saw a ghost." Even Edgar, who'd been there before, said he never saw anything, though he did say he had a creepy feeling the entire time he was there. Our first trip to the cemetery did not go exactly as planned. When we got to the place, we managed to find a back street to pull onto and park. As we began walking towards the cemetery, and got to the main road that separated us from the long, dilapidated stone wall, a local cop pulled up in front of us, blocking our route across the street to the cemetery. Luckily, Jimmy didn't smoke dope, and was completely sober while driving that night, or else we could have been in some serious trouble. "How you boys doing tonight?" the cop asked when he rolled down his window. Being the sober one, Jimmy was automatically our leader, and spoke for all of us. Luckily, he knew that, and responded immediately. "We're doing alright, officer. Just out for a walk." The officer nodded with a knowing smirk. He knew why we were there. "Not going into that cemetery, are you?" "No, sir." "Good. 'Cause I'd have to arrest every single one of you if you did. Where are you boys from?" Jimmy told him the name of our town. "Well, why don't you do everyone a favor? Get back in your car, and drive on home." "Alright, sir." With that, he followed us back to Jimmy's car, and even went so far as to follow us to the edge of his jurisdiction, making sure we didn't turn around and try to go back that night. We were dismayed, but not defeated. If we couldn't go in that night, we planned a future endeavor. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, we were back in Jimmy's car and headed back to Pinewood Cemetery. This time we took extra care. We went on a Wednesday. As last time, we had tried it on a Friday, and we figured that police wouldn't expect people to try and get in the middle of the week. Also, we found a more secretive back road that was on the same side of the road as the cemetery, so we wouldn't have to cross the main road in order to reach the place. We parked on the side of the back road, got out and stretched our legs, and made our way to Pine Woods. Our first stop was the mausoleum, a structure located near the front of the cemetery. Luckily, it was far enough away from the main gates that we had no worries about being seen by passing police spotlights. We still had to be quiet, but we were naturally silent as well. We didn't want to miss out on any of the supposed spooky sounds we would hear in the cemetery. We did hear spooky sounds that night, and I will never forget what we heard for the rest of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason for the visit to the mausoleum was because it is rumored that it housed a couple of satanic rituals, maybe even a few sacrifices. At least that is what Edgar told us. I don't know how the others felt when they entered that place, but I felt far colder than I had been just a few moments before on that warm summer night. Looking around with our flashlights, we could see that the building was almost in ruin, with a large portion of the ceiling open and one of the walls being very old and worn. Then our beams of light came upon the writing. I'm not very good at second languages. I stink at trying to pronounce words in French or Spanish. That is why I took Latin in high school, as I knew I would never have been able to speak, or even try to understand it being spoken to me. I'm also not very good at remembering all the vocab words, but I knew enough to tell the writing in front of us was in Latin. I could tell enough, though, I didn't know all the words, that there were some very dark and menacing sentences written there, with some dark red medium as the ink that stained into the very stones. Also, the upside-down crosses and upside-down pentagrams made the subject of the writing very clear. We didn't stay long, and soon made our way down the path to the headless angel statue, Edgar in front as our guide. The path leading to the headless statue had a large number of trees growing on the sides. They grew high, and in the darkness of night, without the light from our flashlights, I could not see the tops of them, yet they seemed to be more of a cage, blocking out any light from the moon or the stars, creating a tunnel of darkness that gave me creeps. The fact that even though it was a warm summer night, we heard no crickets, no animals, no night birds, just the sound of our feet crunching on path. While I was still mostly excited about being there, a growing fear was slithering into my brain, and I began to wonder if it was a good idea that we were even there. We were on the path for about 5 minutes, before a clearing opened up before us. The clearing was about 50 yards long and about 35 yards wide. The path continued across the clearing, and it continued on, into another tunnel of darkness, formed from the trees like the one we had just exited from. The path, and us on it, were on the far right side of the clearing. Looking left, we saw that the flat earth actually rolled up about 2 feet to create a slightly raised area, about halfway through the clearing to the far left side, where the woods created a clear barrier. Upon the raised area were a bunch of old gravestones, probably about 20 or so. Closest to us, near the corner but separated from the rest of the trees, that stopped the extension of the clearing, was a large dead tree. It wasn't very tall, but there were a lot of branches, twisted and bent in every which way. On the other side of the clearing, still on the raised plateau of earth, was a small, plainly built crypt. "Edgar, is this where the statue is?" I asked him quietly, hoping we didn't have to go into the crypt. "No, it's farther down the path. Not too far now," he responded. I nodded, and we started down the path across the clearing. Keith and Jimmy were not looking very happy, and I could empathize with them. I wasn't afraid, but more and more. My gut was telling me that we should not be here, and the best course of action was to leave right now. But being young and finally in the type of place I'd hoped to explore for a long time, I didn't listen to my gut at all. We continued down the path across the clearing, but only got about 20 feet down it, when someone behind me, either Keith or Jimmy, I can't remember, whispered to the rest of us, "Do you guys see that?" Edgar and I turned to see who had said that, and what they were referring to, but we never got the chance. Before we could spin around completely, our eyes came across the dead tree, and it wasn't like it had been not a minute before. Surrounding where the foliage should have been on the tree was a white mist. It didn't look like any sort of fog I'd ever seen before, and the weather conditions that night made fog or mist all but impossible. Yet this mist covered all the branches of the tree, and didn't move at all. However, more than the mist, I remember the eyes. There was a pair of twinkling, red eyes, seemingly suspended from one of the branches closest to the ground. They stood out against the white background they were placed in, and I couldn't see anything behind them. That would be a head for those eyes to reside in, and the eyes were staring at us. All of us, whether it was curiosity or instinct, shone our flashlights up at the tree. The instant the light from the multiple beams hit the tree, the white mist seemed to dissipate, and the eyes were gone. Not only were they gone, but we could not see anything in that tree that would have been the source of those eyes. We kept our flashlight beams on the tree, and everyone looked at each other. I think it was Edgar who shook us out of our delirium, with a comment somewhat like, "Whoa, that was kinda creepy," and urged us to move onward towards the statue. Nervously, the rest of us turned our flashlight beams back to the path, and we began walking again. We made it about another 10 feet when I looked back at the tree. The mist was back, covering the bare branches like cloak, and the eyes had returned. They were in a slightly different place than last time, but were in a better position to watch us. I alerted the rest of the group and we all aimed our flashlights back at the tree. Just like before, the mist and eyes vanished. Again, the group looked at one another, and at that point even I started to get scared. I had seen too many horror movies to ignore the signs that we were starting to get into something deep. But here was the proof I had so long sought after. Even when Keith stated out loud, "We should get out of here," I knew he was right. I sided with Edgar, who said he wanted to press on. After all, mist and glowing eyes can be explained by natural science, and I wanted something that defied everything I had read about in textbooks. I got my very wish soon after that. We pointed our lights back on the path and advanced. Again, we made it about 10 feet when I looked back again at the dead tree. Sure enough, the mist was back, with the eyes. Except there was something different about them. The 2 previous times I had seen them, even though they were red and scary, they didn't look hostile. It felt more like whatever was seeing through them was observing us. The most akin feeling I can conjure is the feeling when you're entering or leaving a store, and the security guard, who thinks you're going to steal or have already stolen, watches you pass. But that 3rd time, the eyes looked angry. Very, very angry. The 4 of us shone our lights across the tree again, but this time, nothing happened. The mist remained. The eyes continued their enraged stare at us. And now for sure, due to the light beams, we could see there was no skull or anything, man or beast, that housed those gleaming lights within it. It was then as well that we heard the baying of hounds in the distance. It wasn't the sounds of dogs barking, but more like hounds when they are released on a hunt. But it wasn't even that. I've heard hound dogs bay before, and those cries I heard that night may have been similar, but no dog on earth could emulate those cries. As soon as the howling died down, another sound assaulted our ears. The clanking of chains. Now it didn't sound like the rattling of chains that are attached to someone, or something dragging them. It was the sound of chains in a portcullis, of chains being used to open up something big, like a castle drawbridge, or a gate. Whatever it was, it sounded very close. And I at least could not break my gaze from the mist, and those terrible eyes, who had conquered our lights, and stared us down defiantly. This was too much for me. Keith and Jimmy were whimpering softly, and I managed to break my gaze from the tree and turn to Edgar. "We need to leave now," I said matter-of-factly. He continued to stare at the tree in amazement. "No, let's keep going," he responded, sounding a little dazed and confused. I resolved myself. Maybe I would be called a baby later on. Maybe I would be called a party pooper. Whatever. I didn't like what was going on. And if he wanted to come back some other time with some other people to mess around, that's fine with me. While I was there, however, I wasn't going to take any chances of anything happening to me or my friends. I grabbed him by the shoulder, turned him around to look at me, and almost shouted, "Edgar, we need to get out of here now." Edgar nodded slowly in agreement. Maybe it was because he saw that Keith, Jimmy, and myself were freaked out. Maybe I had loosened some sort of hold over him. To this day, I don't know. We 4 don't exactly talk about this in casual conversation. But after his nod, and the acknowledgement from Keith and Jimmy that all 4 of us were leaving, we sprinted out of the cemetery. I've never run so fast in my life, and I don't think I will ever reach that top speed I achieved with my want to leave that place, and never return. We all had one last scare as we left where we had come in, and were still running for Jimmy's car. We could see the lights down the road of the patrolling cop car, and they had a spotlight shining out into the cemetery. Luckily, we all weren't panicked enough to just run out in front of them, and we all dropped to the ground. I don't know how they didn't see a single one of us, but they didn't. And as soon as they had gone down the road, we were all back up and running to the car. So, there's the story. Life went on. I moved out of my home state to go across the country for college. I'm still friends with Edgar, Jimmy, and Keith, but as I said before, we don't really talk about our trip there. We see each other rarely enough as it is. There are far more pleasant topics of conversation. There are a few more facts I learned about Pinewood Cemetery over the years, however. I learned that the cemetery had another name, besides Pinewoods given to it. The Gateway to Hell. I also learned a few years after our trip that Edgar, when he had previously visited the cemetery with friends, had been drunk when he did so, and in his stupor, decided to mess with a gravestone or two while he was there. I still love paranormal things. I still love horror movies. And I still love exploring. The state I reside in now has its fair share of ghosts and horrors, and things that go bump in the night. And I have experiences with them here. Still, nothing has matched the soul-chilling terror I felt in Pinewoods, in those moments before we began to run. In a few of my stories that I've written, I've talked about the characters being in the presence of evil, and how they feel in its company, but I've never been able to find the right words to truly describe what you feel, what you think. when you see the glowing red eyes of the abyss looking back at you. Don't go to Pinewood Cemetery. I can't make you believe me about what I experienced, but at the very least, don't risk getting in trouble by the cops. Spending some time in jail is not worth going into a place you shouldn't even try to visit in the first place. I imagine, however, that if you do go, and you meet whatever were making those horrible cries in the night, and you come face to face with whatever was lurking beyond that chained gate that lay somewhere in the dark of that infernal place, jail will seem like a heaven that is just out of reach.